Hi, I'm Lance Henriksen. You're watching Bryan Lomax Movie Talk. Don't turn it off.
Hello, and welcome to Bryan Lomax Movie Talk. Joining me today is a very special guest, a man I've been itching to get on my channel for some time. We've done a joint collaboration together, so after you've checked out this video, please go over to his channel and check out the other one we've done. Here we're going to be talking about our top 5 science fiction movies. Over there we'll be talking about our top 5 John Carpenter. But let me introduce him, Cody Leach. How you doing, man?
What's going on, everybody? Doing well? Yes, been a long time coming that me and Bryan had this little collaboration, so I've been itching to have him on my channel just as much as he's itching to have me on his, and pick some very good topics for us to kind of pick each other's brains on. So I'm sure we'll agree on a few and yell at each other for a few. It should be fun.
So for a few people who bizarrely wouldn't know who you are, which I can't imagine given that, you know, you getting a bit of a megastar right now on YouTube. Tell people what your channel is all about, what they can expect when they go over to your channel.
Well, it definitely has a horror focus, but I'm not like a horror-centric channel. I have a lot of horror movie reviews, but I also do a lot of comic book films. I do a lot of just off-the-wall movie reviews. I'll review music, like I'll do music news once in a while. I also have the off-the-wall video game review once in a great moon. A lot of ranking videos. I'm a big fan of those. Usually if I tackle a franchise, like I just wrapped up Friday the 13th last month, I'll end that franchise review series with a ranking video and talk about all the films. So there's a little bit of everything over there. I try to keep it fresh.
If you ever want to see someone just have a really good rant, Cody does some of the best rant videos. So yeah, go and check them out. But he's here now to talk about science fiction movie sequels. For those who don't know, I have set up a group a few months ago now on Facebook. It's a science fiction movie group. It's called Sci-Fi, and we thought, you know what, as a way to kind of tie into that and really an excuse for me to plug it some more, we'll do top 5 science fiction sequels. Now I've got a feeling there's going to be 2 films on our lists that would be on anyone with any kind of rational sensibility, would be on anyone's top 5. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Cody's got on his list. We'll start off with him with his number 5. Cody, tell us what that is.
All right, well, kicking it off, my number 5 is a movie that a lot of people have grown up with. I, unfortunately, was introduced to very late in life, about 2 years ago, actually. So it shot all the way up to this list. That tells you how much the movie holds up, but if I had grown up with it, it'd probably be a little bit higher, so don't scream at me for being number 5. The Road Warrior, Mad Max 2. I actually got an itch to watch all of the Mad Max movies after Fury Road. That was the first Mad Max movie that I ever watched, and that movie was incredible. So I went back, I watched Mad Max, watched The Road Warrior, watched all that I could stomach of Thunderdome, which wasn't very much. But The Road Warrior is just such a great sequel because, especially coming off of the first film, which is the most unique feeling of any of the Mad Max movies, because it's very Australian, it's very, low budget. This is the first thing that kind of kicked off Mel Gibson's career, so even he's very kind of early in his prime. But you get to Road Warrior, and as far as science fiction goes, this movie just has a lot of themes that it goes for and a lot of things that it tackles all in one movie. I mean, it's a great action film just on its surface, but if you look below that, I mean, you got things like, you got the desolate wasteland going on. You also have a little bit of a commentary on addiction to technology because all this warfare going on is over control of gasoline so that they can control vehicles when, if everybody would just kind of abandon the vehicles, they'd probably all be just fine and they could live and they could kind of rebuild society. But all this warfare over technology, you also have some sadomasochistic stuff going on with a lot of the leather and the spikes that all the villains are wearing, like Lord Humongous. Just such a wild movie to watch. Like everything that you loved about Mad Max Fury Road and how weird and off the wall and crazy that movie is, it's kind of a smaller scale, obviously, because of the budget and because of the times, but The Road Warrior kind of kicked off that version of the Mad Max films. So I think it's a really good sequel. I think Mel Gibson is one of his coolest characters. Obviously, it's an iconic character. The third act, it's got some of the best chase and just vehicle warfare, especially for the time. The villain is very cool, not only with Lord Humongous, but the other villains, which the name is escaping me, but it's the guy who was the bad guy in Commando, who's basically just has this he's this wild, off-the-wall character, and you see some very gruesome deaths of all of those villains. So I love The Road Warrior. That was a very cool movie to be introduced to late in life and still have it hold up. That is my number 5.
Awesome. Right. Yeah, I mean, Mad Max, I think there's definitely 2 good films in there, one of which I do think is a little overrated. I thought Mad Max Fury Road was a bit overrated, though I still think it's a very good film, don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
Mad Max 2, I give a bit more respect towards, just because it was still kind of independent. I don't think it can be truly classed as an independent film, but it still had that independent vibe from it. I personally think the first one is dull as nuts. It's only really in the last the last act gets entertaining, but it takes so long to get there. And yeah, I think Thunderdome, whilst very campy and clearly not a great movie, I have a lot more fun with it than I do with the first one. I would much rather watch Thunderdome than I would the first one. But undoubtedly the second film of that franchise is arguably the best. I think you can make a case for Fury Road? Fury Road? Fury Road.
Fury Road.
Yeah? Fury Road. Man alive. All the titles sound the same, but right, okay. So, yeah. Yeah, the second film in the Mad Max ones is pretty good, but it ain't coming anywhere near my list, I'll tell you that much. What is coming on my list, in my top 5, is a film that I'm pretty sure I will probably get crucified for even contemplating putting on this list. Especially seeing as none of the others in the franchise make the list. So, yeah, prepare yourself for this one, but my number 5 is Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Ooh. I was waiting. I was like,
That's
drum roll,
right,
which one's he
people.
gonna pick?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Force Awakens for me. Look, I'll freely admit that before I watched Force Awakens, I enjoyed the Star Wars movies, but I wouldn't have called myself a fan. I didn't have to own them on DVD or Blu-ray. I enjoyed them. If they're on TV, I'll quite happily watch them and enjoy them. But yeah, for me, Force Awakens, and it seems to me that the only argument that gets levelled against Force Awakens is that it's just a remake of A New Hope. And I'm sorry, but that may be the case, you know? It may be the case. Yes, essentially, it kind of retreads old ground. But the performances are done better. The music, not the music, sorry. The music's the one thing in the film that isn't. The action sequences are shot better. The special effects are better. The direction is better. Literally build up this picture. Yes, they go through all the same beats, but they do it better. Hence, it's a better film. Like, I'm sorry, but you have all this love, all this nostalgia, all this religion, quite frankly, for those original Star Wars movies that I've never been that sold on. So for me, it kind of, The Force Awakens allowed me to see what I guess so many Star Wars fans before had already seen in that original trilogy. I didn't see it in A New Hope myself. I saw the creativity, I saw the world building. I thought that George Lucas was great at doing that. I thought he's a terrible writer. He doesn't deal with things that should be truly emotional in the right way. You know, like the way that Leia just quickly gets over the death of her entire planet. Things like that, you know, the way Luke sees his whole family burnt to a crisp and yet just practically nothing, just goes off on an adventure instead. It's elements like that from a writing standpoint are done so much better by Abrams in The Force Awakens, you know, like when stuff happens like that has weight to it, we feel it. We feel the emotional punch because we see it in those characters. We go through it with them. To me, that makes a better film. I don't know about anyone else, but for me personally, that makes a better film. And I just, for me, like it was one of my favorite. This and Steve Jobs were my favorite film of that year. And yeah, it's an absolute roller coaster ride. It never lets up. The pace never stops, and it's just got so many great emotional beats. Probably the best lightsaber battle as well, for my money, in the series. So yeah, bring on the crucifixion.
For everybody loading up all of their gigantic gun, point them that direction. Don't hit both of us. No, I'm kidding. You know what? You're kind of my hero in a little bit of respect for saying that, Brian, because I'm a gigantic fan of The Force Awakens, and it annoys me how much I have to defend that movie, because you know, I would put The Empire Strikes Back above that one, obviously, just because I grew up with it. So I mean, it's there's some elements of that movie that nostalgia powers over just a little bit, but I love The Force Awakens. It kind of reignited my fandom in Star Wars. And it's funny, I considered myself a Star Wars fan until I joined YouTube. Then I realized that my fandom ain't shit, because I started doing some trivia. I started doing some trivia games back in like a year ago, and people were bringing out Star Wars questions like, what is the number of the hangar that Han Solo parks the Millennium Falcon in Star Wars: A New Hope? I'm like, what the hell? So. But The Force Awakens, yeah, like just like you said, that whole argument that everybody has that is kind of their crutch argument. Well, it's just a remake of A New Hope. Not only is that irrelevant if they do everything right, but that's exactly what needed to be done, and that's exactly what Star Wars fans said that they wanted for years after those prequels. So it's one of those things that annoys the piss out of me that, like, for years it's like, you know, these movies don't feel like Star Wars. It doesn't feel like the classic movies. And then J.J. Abrams comes along and does exactly what a classic Star Wars movie is, and they go, it's too much like the classic Star Wars movie. Shut the hell up. So yeah, The Force Awakens, I'm a big fan of that sequel. So if everything that has come after that original trilogy, to me, that's by far the best. So I'm right there with you. So kudos for having the balls to put that on top 5. Yeah. So number 4 for me, let me refresh my memory just to make sure I don't say number 4 or number 3's place. Yes, I remember it correctly. Number 4 to me is a movie series that, as the trilogy, which it's definitely riding a lot on how amazing the first film is, because the other movies in the trilogy certainly have their flaws, but it's a movie trilogy that I grew up with, and I consider it my favorite movie trilogy of all time for all of those reasons. Number 2 in that trilogy, Back to the Future Part 2, is my number 4.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
Yeah, so if I'm being honest, I think Part 3 is a slightly better movie for some reasons I'm going to get into, but Part 3 is not very sci-fi. It's certainly more Western than sci-fi, so Part 2 is all sci-fi. Back to the Future Part 2, you know, it picks up immediately where the first one comes to a conclusion. They have to go to the future. They have to rectify some things that are going on very wrong in Marty McFly's future. And it's just an awesome movie, because not only does it keep a lot of the same magic of the first movie going, especially with the characters of Marty and Doc, but so much imagination in that movie, to the point where it's hilarious. It's like a running joke about how many things Back to the Future Part 2 predicted about our future, from like the Cubs World Series to... I mean, there's so many things, like the Jaws, 37 joke about how like horror sequels just keep cranking out. There's so many things that they kind of tipped a hat to that became true later on, that it's hilarious to watch. The special effects are really good. I mean, we don't have flying cars yet. You know, 2015 didn't bring that, but I think that aside from the fact that the third act feels slightly redundant just because it goes back to the events of the first movie and kind of retools it a little bit, I think that it's a hell of a fun movie. I love the whole thing about the struggle against Biff as he kind of goes back and changes the future to become like this Donald Trump type character. So much about that movie is just pure nostalgic awesomeness, and I think it's a great sequel to Back to the Future and a great lead-in to where we wrap that trilogy up in Back to the Future Part 3. So number 4 for me is Back to the Future Part 2.
Yeah, I never had a lot of the problems that like a lot of people seem to have with Back to the Future Part 2. I think it's a really solid trilogy. It's not my favourite sci-fi trilogy, none of the films are on my list, but yeah, I grew up with those films, you know, and I think to a large extent that's kind of why I stopped watching them, because they got played to death. They, like, TV over here really hammered them. Like every holiday season a Back to the Future film was on. It was like Superman, you know, every holiday season, like usually Christmas for Superman, but with Back to the Future it didn't matter what holiday it was. It's like Back to the Future, stick one of them on. So yeah, they kind of got hammered to death, and I think that that's kind of waned my enthusiasm for them over the years. But even so, I recognise that they are a great collection of movies, must be said.
Absolutely.
But yeah, my number 4 choice is, for me, this. See, I'm here just basically to piss a lot of sci-fi fans off, because I swear I am a genuine science fiction nut. It's my favourite genre. I just don't share the opinions of a lot of people. I recently watched the original Planet of the Apes, and I thought it was complete garbage.
Damn.
I
need
did
to get out of the way.
Yes. I did review it on my channel. I said as much. I think it's got a lot going for it. Don't get me wrong. I can understand in many ways why it got that status that it did, but just by today's standards, I was underwhelmed. However, when they came back with Rise, they kind of rebooted the series with Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I saw the trailer for that. I was like, nah, don't look good. And I watched it and I was like, my goodness, they've done something with this. They've really done something with this. Such character-driven story. So I was looking forward to the sequel. I thought, like everything, the sequel will probably be a step down. But if it's only a minor step down, I can take that. I can accept that. It was not a minor step down. It was a flipping behemothing step up. Dawn for the Planet of the Apes is an incredible film. Again, recently with War for the Planet of the Apes, a film I think doesn't quite get enough credit as far as sequels go for me. But clearly the best one is Dawn. And I think not just of this trilogy, but of the entire Planet of the Apes kind of movie series. I think it knocks every other film out of the water. With the exception of War, I think War is almost touching the quality of Dawn. But for me, Dawn just hits every note right. It's a film about humanity, and that's what all the best science fiction is about. It's about what is it to be human. What does that even mean? Because we're top of the food chain, or we certainly like to think ourselves top of the food chain. So the best science fiction movies, they deconstruct that. They look at that. They ask, well, what does that actually mean? If we're at the top, why is that the case, and what does that mean if something else comes along, and this, that, and the other? So just seeing the politics that are playing out between both ape kind and humankind, and just the fact that there are the same people on both sides, heroes and villains, and even the villains are just, they're not out and out villains. They have very realistic motivations. You understand why they came to the position that they're in. So it's just a brilliant commentary on humans, on humanity, but told through the perspective of apes. It's a brilliant film, tremendous action sequences, and the character of Cobra. A lot of people, they talk about Caesar and the work that Andy Serkis did with that, and quite rightly so. It is phenomenal, but Cobra as well, man. Cobra is just such a tremendous character, just a real, like all the best villains, someone you can relate to on some level. So yeah, love it. Brilliant piece of science fiction.
Well, as we talked about in our John Carpenter top 5 on my channel, there's times when me and Bryan, like 85% of the time, where we might even have the unpopular opinion, but we have straightened arrow, we agree on every single point, and there's about 15% of the time where we could be on complete opposite ends of the earth. And this is not one of those times, because I'll be talking about that movie here in a little bit. Number 3, or wait, am I on number 3? I am on number 3. Number three for me is probably going to get maybe a little bit of controversy just because it's at number 3, but these are great movies. So I mean, it's a top 5, people, calm down. Number 3 for me is Aliens, the sequel to Alien. This is one of those movies, like we were talking about Halloween, it's like, what more can you say about Aliens? But Aliens is a movie that I grew up with. I grew up with it much more heavily than the original Ridley Scott movie. I actually didn't see the original Alien until I was like, I think 14. It was a way late in life, but Aliens is like one of those great mixes of science fiction and action, and it went to that whole James Cameron sequel route where he kind of takes a very horror-centric thing and he kind of flips it and puts some more action and makes it bigger and, you know, a little bit better, in my opinion. You get the character of Ripley, who immediately, if she wasn't already by the end of Ridley Scott's film, this movie cements her into history as like one of the greatest, not only characters, but like quote-unquote final girls. We talk about that a lot on Killer Flicks and on Scream Stream. Just a badass character. I mean, this is a character that, you know, you're talking about going up against monsters the size of a freaking building, and she's just like, get away from her, you bitch. You know what I mean? It's awesome. So much awesome creature effects carried over from Ridley Scott's movie. You get awesome characters in these Marines, from like Bill Paxton, one of the most standout characters of this guy who's like the loud, wisecracking character, but whenever shit hits the fan, he's like the biggest pussy in the group. So it's awesome watching that unfold. You got Lance Henriksen playing the android, and kind of a flip from the android in the first film that ended up being a villain, and he's the one that has the most heart of any of the characters, arguably. So it's a very cool seeing that unfold. You get the character of Newt, who, you know, oftentimes in horror movies they have this trope where there's a cat or something that they have to save. They had that in the first Ridley Scott movie. We got to save the cat. Well, in Aliens, it makes sense because you have this human little girl who has been abandoned, her family's been wiped out and eaten alive, and you get this mother-daughter relationship because Ripley is awakened to find out that her daughter not only is dead, but she's died of old age. Like, she's been frozen for decades. And now she kind of has to rekindle this mother-daughter relationship with Newt, and that gives you a very anti-cliche reason to go out of your way to save this character. So very smartly written, awesomely directed. The acting, I mean, Aliens is just one of the greatest sequels of all time. So regardless if we're talking about sci-fi, action, horror, if you just put a top 5 sequels list out there, Aliens is going to make it on most people's lists. So Aliens is my number 3.
Absolutely, yeah. That brings me to my number 3, which is Aliens.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. Like you say, you know, this isn't just one of the best science fiction movies of all time. It's one of the best movies. Period. It's just, man. It's just this is one of my. There's a whole collection of films from my childhood that really kind of stick with me and kind of formed my opinion about movies in general. This is one of them. This is on the list. You know, James Cameron in particular was very formative in my thinking on film, it must be said. But when you look at sequels before this, it's easy to overlook what Cameron did. You know, he took a film that actually was essentially a slasher film in space. You know, it was a bit like Halloween. It was a slasher film in space. And what he did is he said, actually, I'm going to completely change that. I'm going to make a war movie instead. And it works, like, on an unbelievable level. You know, he didn't come and just rehash, which he could have. You know, he could have got another crew. He could have dispensed with a Ripley character altogether. Could have got another crew and just done the same old shtick. Let's get another alien on, have them, you know, and that I think probably would have been the obvious way to go. But he didn't. He came to it and he thought, actually, you know, who is this character of Ripley? And he got deep under his skin, you know, and he tapped into this, like you said, this theme of motherhood. And it's such a huge theme within the Alien universe, never mind just this film. But you know, you want to talk about the aliens themselves and the phallic symbology that's going on in them, but it just you know, and the way that the alien is birthed from almost from the stomach kind of thing, but yeah, from the chest. It's just, yeah, motherhood is definitely a theme that runs throughout. Creation is a thing that runs throughout these movies. And I think that the genius of Cameron, and yes, I'm going to say that, a lot of people laugh when I say that because they're like, Avatar dances with wolves in space. It's like, screw you. You know what? Cameron's a genius. The technology alone that he's developed for cinema, half the blockbusters you watch today, they exist because of the technology that he invents on each of the movies he makes. So that alone is genius enough. But from a writing standpoint as well, man, you know, he tapped into the thing that was very real about this character, and he elevated her. He elevated her beyond just a scream queen, and made her this kick-ass, real badass kind of mother figure that any woman could relate to and any guy could relate to. You know, it's just, yeah, absolutely incredible piece of work, must be said. And yeah, I'll say it again, genius. As far as sequels go, genius. As far as sci-fi goes, genius. Action cinema, genius. Love it, love it, love it. And it's only by virtue of how good the next two films on my list that it ended up at number 3. But let's hear your number 2.
Awesome. Well, for everybody that's already put your guns and your pitchforks and your torches down about Brian's number 4, go ahead and pick that shit back up again, because number 2 is Dawn of the Planet of the freaking Apes. So I don't think that the original Planet of the Apes is a bad movie at all. Some of the things about it have not aged great for me. I actually saw it as a kid, but for all the reasons that you said that Dawn is easily the best movie in that entire franchise, I agree wholeheartedly. I did a franchise ranking right after War came out, and spoiler alert, Dawn was number 1. For all the reasons you said. I mean, exactly what you were talking about with the trailer of Rise. It was like, oh God, they're going to try to do this again, because I'm not a fan at all of the Tim Burton movie. And all I saw was, like, you know, the CGI hadn't quite gotten there yet by the time that Rise came out. Rise was kind of like this huge step forward in CGI and motion capture. But yeah, saw the movie and we're like, damn, that was a good Planet of the Apes movie. And then you hear the sequel and you're like, man, exactly, as long as it's close to as good as Rise was. And Dawn blows Rise out of the water. It's amazing how much they get in emotions from just following these apes. Like, you could almost disregard humans completely in those movies, and you will get so much emotion just from these CGI characters and sign language, and it's incredible, the world building and the relationship building that they have with those ape characters. You got Caesar, who I think is one of the greatest, if not the greatest character put on film in like the past decade at least. Toby Kebbell playing Koba, and one of my favorite villains of all time, for all the same reasons that you were talking about. A very underrated as far as villains and as far as credit that needs to be given for that movie. I think he does equally as good as Andy Serkis. And he's one of those great villains too, where you completely understand where he's coming from. Even though he's evil and even though he does some very bad things, you totally understand why he's doing it. I mean, this is a character that has been tormented and tortured and picked apart and prodded by humans since birth. And then you have Caesar, who was put in a situation where he was raised and loved and given the good example of humanity. And it's that just battling of ideologies where Caesar's like, humans can be good, and Kobe's like, or Kobe, wow. Koba, Toby and Koba is kind of mixing up here. Koba is like, no, I've never seen anything but horror from these people. You're not letting them into our group. This is our society. Keep them out. And just how that whole thing unfolds all the way up to that awesome third act fight with them is just, it's brilliant to me. I think even the human characters are really good. Like, you got, I forget the actor's name, but he's very good. I think Jason Clarke is his name. But he's a very good character. He's kind of that example of like good humanity. And you also have, like, they could have easily written Gary Oldman to be a mustache-twirling, like, criminal or a war leader where he just, I don't care, just wipe out the apes. They could have easily done that, but even his perspective, you understand, because the apes, even though we kind of created them and did it to ourselves, from their perspective, the apes are wiping out humanity. So you look at it from the view of a human, and it's like, okay, we need to wipe these things out before they wipe us out. This is a survival of which species is going to win. So there's no character in this movie where you don't see their perspective. The only negative that I've ever had for this movie is you have the one character who's like the douchebag character that screws everything up, that, you know, brings a gun, and, you know, and the only thing that I have is I think they overwrite him as an asshole just a little bit, because it's a subtle art. When you write a douchebag in a movie, sometimes you can overdo it, and I feel like they overdo it just a little bit with this character, but it doesn't take anything away from the movie at all. I could go on for hours about how much I love Dawn. I think that movie is one of the greatest sequels of all time. Everything that I said about Aliens, I echo that for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. So, love that movie to death. So glad that you have it on your list, so I'm not the one saying that, I'm defending it, Planet of the Apes. So, Number 2, Dawn for the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, my number 2, and I got a feeling this is going to be your number 1, but yeah, we'll see. Okay, yeah, my number 2 is Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Now, so obviously at the start I said there's got to be 2 science fiction movie sequels that are on anybody's list when they're doing this, and I was thinking Aliens, but I was also thinking Terminator 2: Judgment Day. And judging from your I'm wondering if that's not actually the case. But okay, but yeah, just again, we're back into the idea of what does it mean to be human, and we get the best kind of look at that through something that totally isn't human. Through this machine that has been sent back in time to protect John Connor, and just the fact that, as Sarah Connor points out during one point in the film, he's a better father figure than any possible human counterpart because of his programming. Because actually, you know what? When you're programmed to do something and you do it instead of having free will, yeah, that's, again, like a lot of other great science fiction as well, it calls into being the questions about God and things like that. For me, that any great science fiction movie is really all about what does it mean to be human, and is there a God, and if there is, what does that mean for us, and free will, that kind of thing. Once you start talking about free will programming, you have to start thinking about where did we come from. Would we be better off if we'd have been programmed? If we didn't have free will, yes, actually the world would probably be a better place. But without that free will, we don't get the opportunity to be at our best, because we don't get the opportunity to make that choice to do things right. So all the way through this, yeah, we've got this Terminator that on a practical level is the best father John Connor could ever have, because he's been programmed with these purposes. But yeah, on the other hand, you've got a mother with total free will who's an absolute crackpot who they have to break out of the mental institution. It's brilliant, and besides all of that social commentary, it's just a kick-ass action film with a great villain from Robert Patrick as the T-1000. Again, Cameron pushing the envelope with special effects. Even TV shows would be using the special effects that were used in this not so long after. It's just like you see that all the time with Cameron's movies. His movie comes out, sooner or later, other films, other TV shows are using the stuff that he's been doing. But yeah, brilliant science fiction, tremendous action sequences, some of the best action sequences in any film, quite frankly. If there's one thing that Cameron knows how to do, it's how to shoot action. But yeah, I could go on, but like I said, I've got a feeling you might want to say some things on this, so I'll let you give us your number 1. Go.
Well, you might be a little bit surprised then that my number 1 is dun 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 Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Brian, you know me so well; it makes me all tingly. Yeah. So you I'll let everything that Brian said regarding the deep intellectual character study and the social commentary. He nailed all of that, so I actually don't even have to cover that. I agree 100%. But yeah, this is a movie that was so important to me growing up. Like Lost Boys and Terminator 2 are the VHS tapes that I think I wore out the most growing up, and for all the reasons that we've already discussed whenever you discussed it. One of the best sequels of all time, one of the best action sequels of all time, one of the best sci-fi sequels of all time. I mean, it's just, you got Arnold Schwarzenegger in what I think is his best movie by far, and he's got a lot of good ones. It's also a very underrated performance by him, because while you can view it as robotic, it's also, there's a lot going on beyond that performance and behind the scenes, you know what I mean, as far as everything you were talking about with kind of the father figure and what does it mean to be human. Iconic sequence after iconic sequence after iconic sequence. I mean, from the biker bar at the very beginning all the way to breaking her out of the Pescadero penitentiary. You have like the freeway chase on the motorcycle, to the steel mill. I mean, every single sequence in this movie is iconic. I mean, it's like one after another. James Cameron just made the best possible sequence that he could and had a brilliant way to thread it all together. You got awesome characters, not only in the T-1000 as the villain and in effects that still hold up today perfectly. There's nothing about the way that the T-1000 looks where you go, woo, that's definitely 1990. It still holds up. Everything as far as how throughout the movie, the skin starts to get blasted off of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they keep it perfectly in line throughout the sequence of the movie, how his damage looks. To the character of John Connor, who I think, even though he's kind of washed up now as far as an actor, Edward Furlong gives the best performance of that character in the entire film franchise. And it makes you feel for him a lot, kind of as this broken teenager who's kind of in that rebellious stage, but he's just longing for some stability as a parent. And both his mother and his father figure. And then you also have the whole thing, like, I love the special edition. I don't know if you count that as kind of the definitive version of the movie or not, but the director's cut where they kind of, both of the director's cuts, the Aliens one and this one is kind of like my definitive version of the film. Yeah. But you get to the scenes that he inputs where Kyle Reese comes back and is still kind of haunting Sarah Connor. Just Sarah Connor herself, like everything that we said about Ripley also applies to Sarah Connor for this movie. Like, she was a great character in the first movie, but she was the final girl damsel in distress. You get to this one, and she's almost kicking more ass than Arnold Schwarzenegger is. Yeah. She got built, she got ripped. She's a very hard-nosed character. She's got some very, ironclad views on what needs to be done. Just like the whole sequence when she goes to assassinate Miles Dyson because she believes that this one cold-blooded death is worth it to save humanity. And then that also brings in more questions. Is it worth it to kill somebody who's innocent to prevent the future? And I mean, like you already said, we can go on for hours about Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I think it's a brilliant movie. I think that it's a sequel that will probably never be topped in the Terminator franchise, especially if the sequels that we've already gotten are anything of a sign. But yeah, this is a movie that is just a piece of me. I grew up, and this movie is kind of one of those films that formed who I am. So it's very important to me, and that's why it's my number one.
Yeah, same here. Absolutely same here. And it does raise the question, who would win in a fight, Sarah Connor or Ripley? I think if I'm being perfectly honest, I think I've got to go with Sarah Connor. I think she's definitely a bit more of a scrapper when it comes to hand. Although, Ripley gives as good as she gets, I think. But okay. My number one then, fairly recent entry into the sci-fi lexicon.
I know what it is.
It's Blade Runner 2049. I think it's hands down the most beautifully shot film ever. I think, list a few films you want to put on the table to be regarded as the best shot films of all time. If this ain't on there, I think you're smoking crack, quite frankly. I believe Roger Deakins got his Oscar for this, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, bloody good show, must be said. But just beyond the way it looks, production design and all that lot, the direction from Denis Villeneuve, I'll try and get his name right this time. Again, bringing together all those elements that make the perfect science fiction film through this character of Kay, who seemingly doesn't have free will to the degree that human beings do, although that is, of course, tested throughout the film. We do see that he makes certain choices, and that's really, really key to what's going on in the film. The fact that he chooses his own destiny at one point, but is that choice also part of something higher, a higher purpose? Is he being directed by a higher power? All the evidence would suggest that it is. So again, the film deals with this question of, is there a God? If so, what does that mean? Do we need to tune into what he's saying? Do we go our own way, or do we lay our lives down for the sake of following his plan? That kind of thing. We get this other character played by Jared Leto, who is a man, but he acts like he's a god. He's got a god complex. He creates life, but he creates life to not have free will. He creates life to be expendable and to be subjugate to the rest of humanity. And it's just, yeah, all of these themes are just weaved together so beautifully, so brilliantly, so poetically, that it's one of them films you just have to let it wash over you and take in the ambience, because it's an experience more than anything else, you know. A lot of people say it's got pacing issues. I call BS on that, quite frankly. I don't think it's pacing issues at all. I think it's paced brilliantly. I think it's paced to perfection, because it allows you to engage with this world, to soak up the surroundings and exist, to be present within the world that Kay is walking through. Yeah, I think it's perfection, about as perfect as a film can be. I love it. One of my favourite films of all time. Very recent entry, it must be said. Yeah, obviously it's not appeared on your list, so you don't think the same, but whatever.
I'll say this. It took me a while to warm up to the original Blade Runner. It took me forever to finally watch it. When I watched it, I was expecting something that was ass opposite of what I actually received. And when I watched it again, knowing what to expect, I enjoyed the movie quite a bit. So I think the same thing is going to happen with 2049. I just haven't given it that second viewing yet. So I did. By no means did I not like the movie when I first watched it. It had been blown up so much by the time that I did see it. You know, best film of the year, and everybody was screaming at everybody that didn't get to see it in theaters. And you know, I was expecting this movie to knock me on my ass, and I watched it, and I was like, that was good. You know what I mean? So I need to watch it a second time, and I think I'll fall more in line with you. I don't think it's going to top Terminator 2 or Aliens or anything like that for me, but it is definitely it's a good movie that I can see all the reasons why those that love it love it. So no argument for me.
No worries. I really do hope you give it another chance, and I really hope it blows your stocks up. I do think that because of the world we live in, with people like you and me doing what we do on YouTube, and it's so readily available, people's opinions are so readily available, that it can destroy your view on a film, I think. You know, I think to a large extent that's what affected me with Mad Max Fury Road, because everyone was like, best action film ever, and I'm like, okay, now I'm expecting big things, and there's no way to not come down from that. So, but yeah, I hope you see it again. I hope it does change over time, but I can understand why this might be a grower for someone rather than just instant classic. But yeah, okay, so there you go, people. That is mine and Cody's top 5 science fiction films. Thank you, Cody, once again for joining us. Please do go over to Cody's channel and check out the other video we did. Like I say, that was top 5 John Carpenter movies. Yeah, and let us know what your top 5 science fiction movie sequels are down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching from both of us, and until next time, crack it.